Welcome to the other side of the coin, where we bring you new perspectives so you can make more powerful decisions in your financial world. Today's guest is a good friend of mine, Dr. Craig Kasper. Dr. Kasper operates at a unique intersection of healthcare delivery, entrepreneurship, and innovation. After more than 2 decades working directly with patients and building healthcare organizations, his focus has shifted towards something bigger: how technology, data, and new care models can fundamentally change how complex health conditions are understood and treated. He's the founder of NYHD, the Institute for Hearing and Balance, a New York-based specialty practice focused on complex auditory and vestibular disorders like tinnitus and balance conditions. These are areas that are often misunderstood and difficult to treat, and Dr. Kasper has built multidisciplinary teams and care frameworks designed to bring more clarity and better outcomes to patients navigating them. He's also helping push the industry forward through technology. Dr. Kasper played a key role in developing MT Basecamp, a platform that integrates wearable biometric data like heart rate variability and sleep metrics into tinnitus care. It brings objective data into a space that historically relied on subjective reporting, which is a meaningful shift. This is a great conversation that goes beyond healthcare. It's about systems, innovation, and how better structure can lead to better outcomes. Without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce founder, entrepreneur, innovator, and clinician, Dr. Craig Kasper.
All right, Craig, welcome to the Other Side of the Coin podcast.
I really appreciate you guys inviting me. This is a unique opportunity for me because the majority of times that I have conversations, whether it's podcasts or other things, interviews, it's usually in the healthcare space. So this is a unique opportunity to, I guess, share some thought and perhaps learn from you guys as well. So I really appreciate the invite. Thanks.
Yeah, of course. So, Zach has been talking a lot about how you're a thought leader. And we were just saying right before here that you would have you were saying that you would have an interesting answer to the first question, which we tee up with every episode. And we would love to know, Craig, what was your relationship to money and finances when you were growing up?
I think that everybody clearly has a different relationship, and that's why this question is probably really interesting for your listeners. From my perspective, I really didn't have a relationship to money growing up. My father was an assistant principal in the South Bronx. My mom was a seamstress. That's how. Then when she came to this country, that was her occupation, and there wasn't a lot of talk about money in our house, interestingly enough, because they just worked so hard just to put food on the table, pay the bills. I remember my dad talking about the fact when they bought their house, which they still live in right now, which is interesting because I'm in my 50s now, and they moved us there when I was 4. So they've been living in the same house for decades at this point. How they struggled just to put storm windows in the windows, and they had to wait a few seasons before they can afford it. So my exposure to money wasn't a formal conversation around the dinner table necessarily. I didn't really start getting interested in the concept of finance or money until I was older. And when I mean older is my first business, which I think is actually a really interesting story because I think you're born an entrepreneur. I don't think that that's something that you learn how to do necessarily. I think that you truly have to be you have to have it in your genetic makeup in some way. But my first business was selling frogs to the other kids on the street. And depending on the size of the frog, that determined the actual cost of the frog. But I would go out and source the frogs from the swamp behind our house because the kids didn't want to do it, but they wanted the frogs. So that was my first entrepreneurial venture, was selling frogs. It's interesting. I haven't thought about that in decades at this point. But that was my introduction. It wasn't that my family actually introduced me to the concept of the conversation of money. I just knew that if I did something, I could earn from that. And then ultimately that led to my piggy bank. So I'm not sure if that answers your question necessarily, but I think that actually is a good story to set up the fact of how I have started businesses throughout the course of my life. I've always taken chances. I've always kind of been the guy who did the dirty work, and hopefully get rewarded for it in the end financially.
That's really interesting. I never heard that story from you. You answered one of the questions I was going to ask, which is what led you to, have a passion around business and finance. And But you did answer that, in part with what you were just saying. I guess a question that I have for you, just because I'm curious about your background a little bit more deeply, is how did you find yourself going into the business that you are in? Being a business owner, being an audiologist and a clinician. What was the path to bring you where you are?
It was a total mistake. It was I was fascinated as a kid by science. As I said, my father was an assistant principal at a middle school in the South Bronx. And I remember when I was a kid, he brought home a microscope for me. And I remember him pricking his finger and putting his blood on the slide so I can see the blood cells. I was always fascinated by the encyclopedia and learning about animals and the environment. And I loved the brain, believe it or not, which, go figure, as a kid, interested by something like the nervous system. But in parallel to that, I also had a passion for music, and I was a musician growing up. I played bass in a punk band as a kid, and had no intention of going to college, interestingly enough. But my father, who was, again, in education, kind of instilled the value of education in me, basically saying that's something that no one can ever take away from you. Depression era kid, right? So I ended up going to school, state school in New York, and almost failed out the first 2 years. Couldn't find my way necessarily. And my dad gave me one more semester to prove myself. And I ended up taking in my major an introduction to audiology course. I had absolutely no idea what it was about. But the first, and this goes to the fact of mentors and also people who can guide you in your career, had a wonderful professor who I met that day who basically sat there and talked about anatomy and physiology and acoustics and psychoacoustics and the nervous system. And all of a sudden, all these worlds started to come together for me. And that was the first semester that I ended up getting an A and a 4.0. And my dad didn't believe me. And he said, do it again. Very long story short, ended up going to graduate school at the University of Buffalo, excelling there, working at Columbia Presbyterian Medical Center. But all along the way, I was really interested in understanding how I could differentiate myself from everybody else in my field. And how do I create these moats around myself and do interesting things that no one else, again, the guy who got the frogs, right? And I got interested I worked with tons of musicians throughout the years. I had interesting businesses where I worked with, you name the touring musician, I've worked with them pretty much, whether it's preventing hearing loss or making custom in-ear products for them. Which led to other businesses down the road that were in that space as well. But I'll tell you the position that I put myself in was a very uncomfortable one after I finished my doctoral degree, where I knew that I wanted formal business experience that I would not get by working in a healthcare position. So I actually left the field of audiology for 3 years, and I went to go work with a consulting firm that was focused in the world of startup biotech and medical device companies. So I was exposed at that point to tech transfer, venture capital, senior management teams, boards of directors, human resources. How do you build companies around science, basically? And that was really the catalyst for me to look at everything that I do so different than I did before that experience.
That's really interesting. It's funny when you were sharing your story. I remember back at my parents' house, my oldest brother, who is medical professional, MD, PhD. He's a research oncologist. He's 8.5 years older than me, so he must have been early on in college, and I was still a little kid. And I remember he brought home in a container a brain of an animal. I think it was like a lamb's brain. And we went into the backyard and we started dissecting it, and he was teaching me. And that's when I knew I didn't want to go into science. Right? I had a different reaction. But I know a little bit about the arc of your journey and how you used to work with musicians, and then obviously you have hearing aids, and then I know you went into more like the sports route and working with people on improving balance, to be either, some people need that work. And then on the other side of the spectrum, athletes of higher performance, if they can master that, for the people who are entrepreneurial or business minded, maybe they're an entrepreneur, right? But who just they're juggling a lot of plates, right? I'm curious what advice you would give to, stay organized. Like how do you run multiple businesses? You have practices across the country, right? Multiple practices. I'm curious if there are any tips or tricks or strategies that you think of about how to keep it all contained and organized.
I was hoping you would be able to provide me with some advice on that today. You are correct, though. My world has definitely gotten much more complicated, I think, because we do have practice here in New York, multiple satellite offices, and then literally this past month, we formally launched a new business, a new venture out in Scottsdale, Arizona, which I'm sure we can talk about as well. How do I organize myself and focus? I surround myself with really good people. First of all, I think that anybody who is building something has to really understand and come to grips with the fact that they just simply cannot do it all themselves. It's an impossibility. It's a surefire and shortcut to burnout and not getting anything accomplished that you want to put out into the world. So first, surrounding myself with amazing humans, whether it's in my practice here or what we're doing out in Arizona. Technology has played a really important role in terms of how I organize myself. I've gone from 4 different calendars down to 1 because I have a tendency, or I had a tendency, to actually double and triple book myself, sometimes in different states.
That's impressive.
Which we haven't figured out how to actually split and replicate ourselves at this point just yet. So that was a real problem. So really focusing on time management has been critical for me as well, is, making sure that I'm not only carving out and being very structured. And I'm not a big believer in to-do lists. And I think that this was kind of my point with the calendar, is that I'm not a big believer in to-do lists because we have a tendency when we create a to-do list to list out 50 things that we need to do. And then we realize we're only getting through 2 of those because they were pretty darn big projects for that day. And then we get disappointed, and then we roll that to-do list over to the next day. And then it keeps building and rolling, versus taking a task and saying, okay, this will probably take me an hour to do, and literally putting it into the calendar. And that's when I do that task, right? So it's really about focusing on how to do my tasks. The other thing is, what I think is really a sorely overlooked element of this, is that if I don't take care of myself, I can't accomplish any of the things that I'm trying to accomplish at this point. I've had my share of health scares throughout my life. I deal, like most people, with chronic conditions that can potentially derail everything. But finding the time to exercise every single day, for me, that means waking up before 5 o'clock and being in the gym by 5 o'clock. Finding time for brain recovery, making sure I am getting sleep. I use bio-trackers. I use a Whoop band. People might use their Apple Watch or Oura rings or anything like that. Sleep quality is critical for me. So I focus heavily on my sleep and diet. So taking care of ourselves, I think that's one of the most important things to success, because if we're not taking care of ourselves, we can't take care of our business, our people, our families, etc.
Yeah, it's so true. That's what we were talking about before we jumped on, even how, you need to have all the tires of the car inflated in order to be, operating in, an optimal way. It's putting the oxygen
Sometimes I'm
mask.
pretty deflated, but I think that's business in general, right? You have to learn how to reinflate yourself, though.
Yeah, putting the oxygen mask on yourself first. Yeah, it's so true. And surrounding yourself with good people, and as a business owner, creating, retention strategies to attract those good people. I think that kind of is part of that conversation also. It's interesting how finances kind of seeps into, every business owner's world, right? Whether it's the business finances or how to scale the company, which is something I definitely want to talk about today. But Mike, I think you were maybe going to jump in and say something.
There are a few things I wanted to press on. One, just really practical consideration. I also am a big fan of well-being. I think that is the foundation that sets us up for everything in our life. And so I'm wondering if you could speak just a little bit to how do you set yourself up for good quality sleep, and what does your diet look like?
Great question. So look, sleep is the linchpin for everything. And, if you take a look at poor sleep, it is intimately connected with brain health, with physical health, cardiovascular health. All of these things are intimately related to sleep. Most of us think I can sleep when I'm later in life, or I can run off of 4 hours of sleep because I'm burning the candle and I'm building this thing, which a lot of us as entrepreneurs and business owners have no choice sometimes to do. But prioritizing sleep, what I end up doing is, one, I really try hard not to have electronics in the bed with me. That's the first thing. If you look at all the science around that, just the light from TVs, phones, iPads, etc., that's basically telling your brain to release chemicals that it's time to wake up. Mm-hmm. So that's going to significantly impact your sleep. Trying to stay away from negative things before, like the news. It's hard nowadays not to listen to the news, whatever side of the political and financial spectrum you find yourself on, everything is negative, right? So I really try as hard as I can to focus on the analog things. I think back what you do with your babies, right? Warm bath, dark room, cold room, bedtime story, lights out, right? Now, it's not possible all the time. But if you incorporate some of those things and go more analog, read a book. If I read 2 pages of a physical book in bed, I don't remember what I read. I'm out. But to be perfectly honest with you guys, I don't have trouble getting to sleep at night because I'm so on all day, every day. I am just done at the end of my day. And my wife laughs because as soon as my head hits the pillow for most nights, I'm out. I'm completely out. But I empathize with the people who have trouble going to sleep. So I think those tactics are things that I've used in the past. And we talk to patients about that too, because sleep is an important part of what we do with our patients as well. And they benefit. And also tracking. I use a Whoop band. This is not clearly a commercial for any technology necessarily, but I think data, if it's used properly, whether that's financial data, right? P&Ls, et cetera, forecasting, but data on your physiology is important. And I can see last night that I had really garbage sleep. And guess what? I'm pretty darn not on my game today. So what am I going to do tonight? I'm going to go to sleep earlier to make up for that. So,
well, that'll explain why the conversation's it's really just going so poorly, right? You're just totally off your game, didn't sleep well. No one would ever realize it, Craig. I'll tell you that.
I try.
So I actually, this is an area of fascination for me too. So there's a couple of things that I want to maybe add to this. And then I actually have a curiosity for Zach, because I'm starting to see a lot of the parallels in the way that you track things in your business and the way that Zach tracks things in his business. So there's this really important distinction between sleep quantity and sleep quality, right? And so a lot of us, if we get 8 hours, sometimes we wake up tired and we're really confused about why it is that we're tired. And something that sleep data really helps with is to be able to identify what you were speaking to, sleep quality.
Yeah.
And if you want, you can maybe add some, maybe a little bit more in there if you would like to. But another thing that I would add, and I don't know if this was intentional or is intentional, but the fact that you wake up early and work out early, your sleep cycle starts early in the day, right? So it's important to get sunlight in the morning, and ideal time to work out is in the morning. And so that's something that a lot of us miss, is that your sleep cycle, it's almost always going on, right? Your circadian rhythm isn't just about the hour or two before bed. It's how is your day organized?
Yep.
So.
Exactly. Yeah, I think the quality of sleep, to take that first, is critical, because if you take a look at the different stages of sleep, everybody says, well, I get 8 hours of solid sleep, but they're still waking up exhausted, as you said, or getting out of bed exhausted. Is because in many cases, patients are not getting into those restorative stages of sleep, which is deep sleep and REM stage, which is rapid eye movement, known as dream state for the most part. When you look at the neuroscience and the science behind it, the deep sleep stages are primarily physically restorative. You're repairing your body essentially during those deep stages. The REM stages are more brain restorative. You're actually forging those neural connections and the memories from the day, but your brain is literally cleansing itself of toxins that have accumulated throughout the course of your day. So if you're not getting into those stages of sleep, your body is still kind of in a bad place when you get out of bed. So you're right. From what I understand, and I'm not a sleep expert per se, and I don't want to come across as one. This is all stuff that I talk to patients about. Because I've done it for myself for many years. You're looking at probably 40+% of your total sleep should be in those deep and REM stages. If it's anything less than that, you're just not getting restful sleep. So yeah, and I agree with you also from a perspective of your rhythms, which especially for those of us who are in business and we're traveling a lot, our rhythms are totally thrown off if we're crossing time zones. And it's even more important for us to try to stay on some level of normalcy with our schedule, even if we're in a different time zone. So for instance, I mentioned to you guys earlier, I go back and forth to Arizona quite frequently. Right now it's a 3-hour time difference. In a few weeks, it'll be a 2-hour time difference, which is much easier on the physiology. But I'm still waking up at 3 a.m. without an alarm out there and going to the gym for the most part at that time, because that's my time to go. That said, I'm not fun at the end of the day because everybody wants to go out to dinner and I'm just done by like 6 o'clock. But that's the trade-off.
I like this, and I think Mike has one or two more items he wanted to touch upon. But the point of the podcast is to highlight overlooked areas, and I feel like sleep and taking care of yourself for business owners especially, but really for everybody, is such a lead indicator, right, for the outcomes that you're going to produce. And sometimes people aren't giving it the respect that it deserves, probably, right? So I think it's actually a really important topic.
Well, I think it's also important if you take a look. I have a team here that works with me, and I'm very focused on, for them, I look at personal, professional, financial goals. Every year we actually look at what their goals are and how we can tie that into business production, right? And then ultimately that helps them reach those goals for themselves, because if they're not intimately tied in with what the business's goals are, then they're just working. And that's just no fun at all. And that's not the kind of environment that I want to have for the business that I've developed.
Right.
But a lot of times
we're rowing in the same direction.
Yeah, exactly. So really at the core of that, those personal goals for a lot of people, it's like they talk about whether it's losing weight, exercising more, whatever it might be. If they see that that's a central pillar in my existence, it gives them the permission to do that for themselves also. If they say, you know what, I have this, this CrossFit class at 4:30 on Thursdays that I really want to go to, great, let's make your schedule so you can do that, because it's that important to me. And if it's that important to them, I want them to have the opportunity to do that. So I think that it's a way to actually help businesses, one, retain people who are great. And anybody who's exercising tells me that they're committed to their well-being and to their development. I want that person on my team long-term, right? So they see me do it. I try to lead by example. I want them to do it as well and give them every opportunity to exercise that freedom so they can reach their goals.
So I actually have a question. I want to tie a few things together here, but Zach, I'm wondering, it could end up being for both of you, but around finances, we're circling around a little bit the way that data can inform the choices that we make. And so if you, as business owners, each of you, if you look at like what are the most important indicators or pieces of data to look at, maybe we can start with Zach. Like in the finance world, if someone's listening to this and is curious about, for sleep, it's the things that we've already laid out. So what would be some of the things to pay closest attention to in the world of finance or business building?
So it's a great question. And I think that a lot of the times people are so busy and they're just running on a treadmill, right? Not paying attention to the data, which, the data gives you the answers. And it's, hard things are hard to do, but they're the most important things to do, right? We're also busy to Craig was talking about before, like time blocking in your calendar to make sure that you have time in order to pay attention to those kinds of things. I will always stand on that. I think everything is custom. So I don't think there's one answer for every business. I think that every business should know their KPIs and every business should understand what they're trying to achieve. But, for whatever the business is and what they're trying to accomplish, I think, I'm going to answer your question maybe a little bit differently. I think what's really important is to reverse engineer your goals So that's something that we do internally with our team, and that's also something that we coach some of the business owners that we work on, that we work with on, and that's really understanding, what do I want to achieve in, let's just say, 1 year, right? I do believe people should have a 10-year vision. People should have a 5-year vision, right? I don't think we should only look at 1 year, but let's just use that as the example. I think you should really understand, these are the goals that we want to accomplish in 1 year. And then it's really reverse engineering it all the way down to the day, right? If this is what we want to achieve in 1 year, well, what do we need to do per quarter? And if we want to accomplish this per quarter, well, what do we need to do each month? And what do we need to do each week? And what do we need to do each day? And I think that's so important because time goes so fast. You don't want to wake up on June 1st and say, we're only 10% to our goal. So now we have to do 90% of what we set out to achieve in the next 6 months. That's really something that you want to pick up on, the second week, right? So that you can really correct the ship. And I actually have a mentor in my life who used the example about making changes in a business, and change never ends, right? I mean, I almost joke, I try to rationalize in my head, like, oh, one day, maybe there won't be so many changes. I don't think that's true. I think it really never ends, right? And Craig, I'm sure you can speak to that as well. But what one of my mentors said, and it really gave me a little bit of grace, because I'm always wanting to change to happen immediately, right? Like so many of us. But I always view it like, when, the bigger the team, the slower the change sometimes. And I almost view it like a ship in the ocean changing direction. It's not going to do it on a dime. It's not going to do it, a 90-degree angle. So it takes time. So I think condensing the time that it takes to identify the changes that you need to make is so important. And, one of the most important things, I'll answer your question like this, maybe a little bit more directly, is paying very close attention to where you're spending your time, right? I think we can all get so distracted, and maybe we're actually doing good things, but if it's not, like what Craig was saying before, kind of like rowing in the same direction, if what we're doing each hour of the day isn't going to be, adding to the bottom line or 10xing the business, or however you want to say it, it's so easy to get distracted doing good things that aren't in alignment with what you're trying to achieve. So hopefully that answered the question in a little bit of a roundabout way.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the challenge is also that, well, not the challenge, but the reality is that depending on where the business owner is in their trajectory, that's going to change the dynamic of things as well, right? But in our business, and like healthcare is interesting because unless you're a business person in the healthcare world, most healthcare practitioners don't think much about stuff. All they think about is, do I have enough money in the bank to pay my payroll and pay my rent and take some money home at the end? That's your typical private practitioner. When you start growing a business larger, you start to realize one, and this goes back to like books like the E-Myth, right? You can't do everything yourself, and your business is not going to grow if you're the person who's actually making the widgets every day. You need to train people and systems to expand and grow your business. And that's what I focused a lot of my energy on, especially over the past couple of years, is one, if I want to build value in the business, I can't be the one who's providing the service necessarily, because my role is to help mentor, grow, challenge the other clinicians that I have in my business, as well as the other team members, to do what they do better. And what I can tell you is, with a high level of certainty, there's a lot of times they actually do the job much better than I would have ever done. And it's simply because they're more focused and they don't have a million other things on their plate. But as a business owner, I would agree again with what Zach said. It's prioritizing things and being comfortable delegating, which I was never comfortable with, because I always thought, like, I'm just going to get the job done myself. But that's not the point, right?
I just gave a presentation, and what we were talking about was a business owner making the transition from Rainmaker, which is how many business owners, almost all business owners start, but making the transition from Rainmaker, leaving that space and becoming the architect.
That's right.
It's kind of looking at the chessboard and what moves you have to make, and then trusting that you have great talent, great people to really handle, what all the work that's happening in between. And I'll actually just jump back to one thing that I was thinking about, Mike, to answer the question a little bit about the finances, I think that people really need to dive deeper, right? So the value doesn't lie on the surface normally. And I think that's the importance of hiring a professional at the end of the day who is expert in their space, because people shy away from complexity, right? And a lot of the times, the complexity is where the value lives. So sometimes, depending on the financial goals, because obviously there's more goals than only financial goals, but focusing on the financial goals, people a lot of the times are leaving money on the table just because they don't have the right strategies. So, whether it's business planning or personal planning, I always like to talk about retirement planning because I think that's a universal thing that everybody has in their life. People say death and taxes are the only guarantees in life. I always say death, taxes, and retirement, because by choice, age, or death, everybody stops working one day. But the point is that people sometimes and businesses are actually closer to their goals than they realize. They just don't have the right strategy, right? So like one big decision, maybe advanced, complex decision that somebody makes, it's usually not a 1-to-1 ratio, right? One decision, I find those complexities, that's where you can sometimes find that 10x maneuver. So I always think that, on the financial side, you're normally not going to find it on the balance sheet. I think it's really understanding, different tax strategies, different trust strategies, trust planning, right? That's something that can really move the needle for a company or a person financially.
I think part of it also is that you said that a lot of things are not on the surface, and a lot of business owners are not looking under the hood, right? We've been lucky in my practice. We have a wonderful dashboard that is literally updated every night with all of the metrics from our software, all the financial stuff that we have that goes on, quote unquote closure rate, whatever that means. So it's like flow, patient flow. It all boils down to flow and conversion, right? But there's a lot that happens in the middle and even before in some cases, right? Attraction. So we have this entire dashboard that just literally has all these data points that we kind of simplified for the team, where they have the ability to look in near real time if we're meeting our quarterly goals. That is what was lacking in my world for such a long time, until I kind of figured out, and this is a company that develops the dashboard for us. It's unique to my field, but you can create dashboards with data points in Google for any business, and in real time have metrics for your whole team. That changed the game for me personally, to look at the business very differently, because I was then making decisions in near real time versus after it happened.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point.
Yeah, there's a saying. So I think one of the themes that is emerging in this conversation right now is around, I don't know if transition is the right word, but I wrote transition down. And there's a saying that what got you here won't get you there. And so, Craig, as I've listened to a little bit of your story, there was an absence of talking about finances, and then there's a way that you transitioned into becoming a business owner and like redefining your relationship to finances. And then for each of you, Zach and Craig, you were talking about in a lot of ways becoming the architect when it was previously the rainmaker. Mm-hmm. And so I think a lot of the people who are going to be tuning into the show are business owners, and a lot of times business owners need to learn to be more adaptable, lean into change more. So I'm wondering if either of you could speak to the ways that you look at that. Like, how do you lean into new possibilities? How do you know when it's time to lean into change a little bit more? Sometimes I imagine there are systems that are really working, so I don't know if you're picking up what I'm putting down, but like, how do you lean into change in a more effective way, especially with an ear for the business owners who are tuned into the show?
You want to take it, Craig, or should I try to jump in?
I can try. I can give it a stab. I'll see if I can pick it up, what you just put down. I never had trouble experimenting. And I think that that's an entrepreneur's kind of a facet of many entrepreneurs, where we're not afraid to do trial and error, pivot, quote unquote. I hate that word, but you know what I mean? It's like figure stuff out as we go along, or the common thought process is we're building the plane as we're trying to land it. And I feel like I've been doing that for my entire career with all the different businesses that I've tried to build successfully and not successfully, which that's fine also, learning from mistakes. So I think that is losing the fear factor of actually just believing that you're the only one who can actually do everything the right way, especially if you're a solopreneur or a small business owner, which I for many years had the concern, I would say, that I was the only one who can do things the right way and I had to generate the income. And as soon as you let go of that and you start to get some level of comfort and then invest more in the good people around you, it gives you permission to actually keep kind of venturing out into the wilderness and gaining confidence that the business doesn't need you as much as you think it does. So taking chances, I think, is important.
Yeah, and my answer, which Craig was actually touching upon, is I really think at the end of the day, a lot of it has to do with mindset, right? So I think it's really identifying what you're trying to create and who you are as a person. There's two different things that I want to say. One is that I remember when my company made the transition. So, I co-founded my firm with my older brother, Mark. And for many years, the business was Zach and Mark. Mm-hmm. And we eventually had to make I'll use your word, Mike, transition into saying the business isn't Zach and Mark. Zach and Mark run the business, mm-hmm. right? So I think once you start leaning into that, you start wearing different lenses and you start viewing things in a little bit of a different way. And then I also think what's really important is to identify, am I a business owner for the purpose of giving myself a job? Or am I a business owner because I'm trying to create something special? And what I've noticed in my career, I can't tell you how many, times I say to myself, oh man, I wish I was doing that 5 years ago, right? But I don't think it works like that a lot of the time. So like some moves that I make, strategically for my business today, I wasn't in position to make those moves 10 years ago, right? So I think it's being opportunistic and really, keeping your eyes open to what's possible. And it's just like anything else. The more you flex that muscle, the stronger it gets. You just have to give yourself the opportunity to start taking those, like Craig said, taking those chances. And I think putting your ego aside is huge. Leaning on mentors, asking for help, seeing what worked, what didn't work from other people's experiences, right? And just, being hungry for more, right? So I look back at our arc of our company and I'm so proud of where we are today. And I still feel like we're on the first stepping stone sometimes. You know what I mean? So it's kind of having that balance too.
I think part of that, just to put a little bit of another element to it as well, is I've prided myself in actually learning about other industries that have nothing to do with what I do from a healthcare perspective, and ultimately stealing, borrowing, adapting things that are working in other industries and making it work in my industry, in my practice, in my business, which is something that allows the profession to grow also, because if you just kind of stick within your lane, nothing really changes. It's the people who are kind of venturing out and then bringing back these unique perspectives that make change.
There's like innovation behind that, even if it's been done before.
Yeah. I'll give you an example. So the things that we specialize, or that I specialize in, is tinnitus, which is ringing in the ears. Millions and millions of people are affected around the world. There's no cure per se. There's a lot that can be done for patients with tinnitus, but there's a bottleneck. There's not a lot of providers that actually know what they're doing, and technology hasn't been up to par, with the exception of some recent FDA approved devices that we're using now. But I started to look at all of the things that we've been talking about in terms of tracking. How do we track biometrics? And I started to incorporate that into a new model, which now is the foundation of the business that we're developing out in Arizona, which we're also using here in New York. But ultimately, nobody else, after decades of working in this field, has thought about the fact that, well, how do we track sleep better for these patients? Because that's a linchpin. How do we track their heart rate variability? How do we track their stress levels and their exercise? Because these are all either positive or negative variables that will impact their tinnitus. Now we have objective measures, and it's simply because I said, oh, I've been wearing a Whoop band for a bunch of years, and I track my blood sugars because I'm a type 1 diabetic with a continuous glucose monitor. How do we actually take these things and apply it to this problem? Now we have a brand new business model that everybody's curious about. So I would just encourage people just to look outside of their four walls, because that's where all the interesting stuff really happens, is at the Venn diagram, right, of all of these different things that are out there in the universe.
I actually have a question for you based on that, Craig. But Mike, did you have another question or anything else that you wanted to touch upon?
No, I mean, unfortunately, we're getting towards the back end here. So there are a few things. Like I was curious to press a little bit on the E-Myth and what maybe lessons you learned there, and about lessons you've learned from your mistakes. And we'll do air quotes, failures. But go ahead, Zach.
Yeah, I'd be interested in hearing, lessons learned from losses, right? I always think those are really valuable. Sometimes you learn more from the losses than the wins, probably often, right? Where my brain was going as I look at the two of you, because on Mike's other podcast that he had Seth Godin as a guest one time, who is obviously, marketing guru.
Genius, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So as you're speaking about the innovation that you're bringing into your industry, Craig, I actually think you have a great marketing mind. You and I have, broken bread many times and talked about marketing strategies and things like that. As you're bringing new ideas and technology and, strategies for your patients to the table, what are your thoughts on marketing, right? Like, how do you market that for your industry? How do you market that to attract, top-notch clinicians? Kind of anything in between, however you want to answer it. But I'm just curious how you view marketing new ideas in your industry.
Marketing in general is an area that every time I think I understand how it works, I realize I have no clue how it works. Because I think it's something that has morphed so much over the course of my professional career. That's where true. I think back years ago where direct mail was the best way to get patients through a door. And now direct mail has no value for the most part, I think, in most industries. Again, I'm not a big believer in the hard sell. I'm not a big believer in the sexy marketing campaign. What I am a believer in is educating people to help make them feel confident to make good decisions for themselves. I think the biggest problem that we face, especially in the world of healthcare, is that there's a ton of misinformation out there. And if we are seen as the credible source, and we are seen as the people who are willing to be, and I love the word Sherpa. The Sherpa is the individual who helps the climbers up Mount Everest. They carry the load for them until they can carry it themselves, and then they feel comfortable where they can get up to the top of the mountain, right? I always saw myself as a Sherpa for my patients, for my clinicians, and the heavy load that I was carrying for them was the education, the information that I had to then empower them to make good decisions. I think that's the best marketing strategy available, because people don't want to feel sold. The smart person out there knows when they're being sold. Mm-hmm. But people are longing for knowledge and information to make good decisions. And I think that I always lead with that. And that's a pillar in my world, pillar in our practice. It's a pillar in everything I do, is the educational aspect.
Yeah, something I would add, since we're invoking Seth Godin here. Seth Godin always talks about people who know, like, and trust you. And so in whatever way that you can establish that with other people, create the connection that they will then know, like, and trust you. That is, to me, what it boils down to. That's effective marketing.
No doubt. I even talk about the when we're counseling patients. I had this conversation with one of my younger clinicians earlier today, talking about process and how you educate people on very complex ideas. But ultimately, they're not going to listen to that as much if they don't know who you are. Mm-hmm. right? If they know who you are and you're genuinely an empathetic human being who's there just to provide them with some quality information, and knowing that you have credibility. How do you build your credibility with someone who's coming to you for help? That's the first step in my mind, because if you're not credible, nobody's going to listen to anything that you have to say. So the first thing in my mind is building credibility, trust, and then you can share the information. And then ultimately, they're going to make decisions based on that. That's how you help people come to a good conclusion, I think. So yeah, not a hard seller.
So Zach, was there anything else before we ask the final question that you wanted to cover today?
No, I mean, there's so many things. I think that, this is a really strong conversation, and, I've always just been so impressed with Craig and how he really is, innovative in his industry and always trying to empower people through education. I think when it comes to marketing, and obviously there's much larger ways of marketing, something that I found on my own team is that a lot of the times, the financial, coach or advisor, a lot of the times they attract people who are similar to them.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I think if you're doing the right thing and if you have credibility, you're educating people from, a good place, then you find that you end up surrounding yourself by other people that you enjoy working with. Mm-hmm. Right. And I think that's a big connotation as well. Right. Most people, they get to a point in their career where, they don't want to just work with anybody. I used to joke when we first started our practice, I used to compare us to Ellis Island, where I was like, come poor, come hungry, like we need clients, right? But eventually there's this tipping point where you want to work with good people who have similar interests to you. So sometimes I don't even think there's like a right and a wrong. I mean, I guess there's certain degrees, but I think just being true to yourself and, if to Craig, educating people and, empowering people to make the best choice is important to him, then that's what his patients are going to care about, right? That's what his team's going to care about. And I think there's a lot of different ways to be successful and to live a happy life. But if you're surrounding yourself with the values that you care about, then you should be excited to go to work every day, right? You should be excited to spend time with the people in your life. And obviously, we all have families and we're all very family oriented, right? Not a surprise that I think the two of you are similar to me in a lot of ways, right? But at the end of the day, we all spend a lot of time working as well. So I don't think that should be overlooked, right? I don't think it should be overlooked that we should respect and appreciate the people that we're rubbing shoulders with, from 9 to 5 for some, or, from 3 a.m. to 7 p.m. like Craig, right? Like whatever it is. So I guess those are my finishing words before we wrap things up, Mike.
Yeah, no, those are really great takeaways. I think one of the secrets to being a really successful business owner is to work with clients that you'd want to just be friends with and hang out with anyway, right? So people that are really aligned with you. So this was a really rich and robust conversation, Craig. We covered a lot of ground, but we would love to know. So we've gotten a little bit of a flavor of what this might look like for you. But in your words, what does it mean to be wealthy?
I haven't heard any of your guests' response to this, so I hope I'm not stealing anybody's response. Look, the obvious financial element of this is not the first thing that came to mind when you asked me that question. For me, because I've had, I would say, pretty significant health challenges throughout my life. I think that wealth is really centered in my world around health and well-being. Ultimately, I know that if I don't take care of myself, as I said before, I can't take care of the people around me, whether they're my family here in the business or my family that's at home. So for me, being wealthy really is having the time, the energy, the space to be able to take care of myself. And yeah, I would guess that there's probably finances that are attached to that, because you can't just take off, to play golf on a Tuesday afternoon for most of us, right? Or to go hiking for a week when there's business that needs to be done, especially when you're a solopreneur or a small business owner. But the financial side for me, it's important for all of us. You need to make money, but the wealth comes for me from health and well-being, I would say.
Yeah, I love that. I can't remember who said this, but I'm stealing it from somebody. And they were kind of listing a lot of different things that people have in life, right? Whether it's business and relationships and adventure and happiness and finances and, fill in the blank. And they were saying how all of these different areas of life, they're all sitting on a table called health. Mm-hmm. And right. And this, this is predominantly, a financial oriented podcast, but I really appreciate how it's not the focus, right? And mm-hmm. there are more areas in life to be successful. And all those items that are on the table of health, they can move you in one way or another of, the experience and the journey of life. So they all do matter and they're all really important. But I think part of why we created this podcast is not only to add insight, with business and finance and leadership, but to also kind of just ground everybody and remember what is most important in life. And everything else is kind of just a tool to facilitate that. So.
Yeah, look, I would say just in parting that it's no surprise that I'm a big fan of the concept of longevity. And there are things that happen in our life that we don't have much control over, that will derail or turn the day sideways for us. But I always try to look ahead, and you hear these stories of people who are literally on their deathbed and they say, do you have any regrets in life? For me, one, I would love to not say that I regretted anything, especially the fact when you ask people those questions, it's very rare that they say, I wish I worked more. I love to work. I love the work I do. I don't consider it work necessarily. I consider this just energy for me. It fuels me in many ways. But what I will tell you is that I hope to look back when that day eventually comes and say that I did not have any or many regrets related to how I took care of myself and the people around me, because that's the most important thing. So.
Great place to end the conversation. So thank you, Craig. Thanks for sharing all the ways that you take care of yourself and that everyone who's listening can better take care of themselves. And there are lots of practical applications. So appreciate you being here, man. And to everyone who's listening, take care. And thank you so much for listening.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Take care, everybody.
Hi, everybody. This is Zach Smith, co-founder and CEO of I Am Financial and the co-host of The Other Side of the Coin. Please remember to subscribe and like. And if you have any questions and or would like to speak, please feel free to email me directly at zacksmith@im-financial.com. That is ZAK Smith at the letter I, the letter M-financial.com. Reach out to us and we will make certain to get you to the appropriate channels. Thank you again, and we hope you enjoyed our show. See you next time. Disclosures. This podcast is for informational purpose only and is not to be construed as tax, legal, or investment advice. Although the information has been gathered from sources believed to be reliable, please note that individual situations can vary. Therefore, the information should be relied upon only when coordinated with individual professional advice. Guest speakers and the firms are not affiliated with or endorsed by Park Avenue Securities, Guardian, Northeast Financial Network, and I Am Financial, and the opinions stated are their own. Guardian, its subsidiaries, agents, and employees do not provide tax, legal, or accounting advice. Consult your tax, legal, and accounting professional regarding your individual situation. All investments and investment strategies contain risk and may lose value. OSJ address is 101 Crawford's Corner Road, Suite 2405 in Homedale, New Jersey, 07733. Their phone number is 908-709-0020. Our phone number is 914-603-8325. A member of the Northeast Financial Network, financial representative of Guardian Life Insurance Company of America, New York, New York, I Am Financial, and Northeast Financial Network are not affiliates or subsidiaries of Guardian
Arkansas license number 163033838, California license number 4108463.
Submission number 8807584.1, expiration 328.